Welcome to another Cup of Joe. I'm your host, Joe Tumalo, CEO of PG Partner, with my guest back by popular demand, Katie Collins.
Good morning, Joe. How are you?
Wonderful. And yourself, Katie?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Thank you, Katie. You're CEO of Pathway Philanthropic Solutions.
Yes, yes.
And we got so many great reviews from your first appearance that people said, bring her back, bring her back.
Glad to hear it. Always happy to join you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. What's on your mind these days?
Well, I wanted to chat with you. My background. I spent almost 10 years within a donor advised fund environment and wanted to chat through with you because I'm contacted weekly by nonprofits that want to learn more, want to get in front of DAFs, aren't quite sure what they think of them. And what your perspective? Because I know, especially with planned giving, it must be something that comes up. And so wanted to hear your thoughts.
Just generally on donor advised funds?
Yeah, well, and what you're hearing and seeing from your clients that you work with.
Well, obviously they're growing in popularity. And I'm surprised at how many, as we've discussed, most of my donor interactions are people 65 and over. And I'm surprised at how many are not familiar with donor advised funds. And my suggestion to all gift officers is open up your own donor advised fund. There's nothing like, it would be like motorcycles. I've never been on a motorcycle. They freak me out. But it would be like me selling a motorcycle. Well, I've never had that experience, right?
Right.
Although if I ever did that, we went out to Colorado and rented motorcycles, and oh my God, okay, I get it. This is it. This is the experience. This is the benefit. This is the good feeling from it. How can we talk about things if we haven't experienced it? So donor advised funds, for most of them, cost you nothing, easy to get into, and it just helps from that perspective. And I even tell donors, like with all my clients I work with, we're donors. My wife and I are donors, and we make grants from our donor advised fund to my clients. So in certain conversations with the donor, will say, this is what my wife and I do. We make donations to this charity that we're talking about through our donor advised fund. That's something you're familiar with. So number one, I'd suggest, boy, you are good. You're the hostess here, and I'm sorry, you're the guest. But I love these types of Cup of Joes where it's not just me interviewing you. It's just, let's have a conversation like we're sitting having a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, a cup of Joe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there you go. Did you show your cup? What kind of cup?
Just some flowers.
Flowers?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
No, that's fine. Well, do you find, so you spoke of kind of some of the boomers you're engaging with who are the kind of, and the donors, but within the organizations, the nonprofits, are the gift officers, do you find that they're overly familiar with it or they're uncomfortable because they don't really know what it is?
I would say I don't think they're as familiar with it as they should be. And it's not their fault. It's bringing the cash, although, these are cash gifts, but obviously there's the grants are the cash gifts, and then making us a beneficiary are the deferred gifts. Yeah, and it's just it's like any other cash gift. Although a question for you is, like, a friend of mine, and I appreciate it, just sent me this thick catalog on donor advised funds. I'm like, oh crap, do I really need to know that much about it? I mean, I have a basic understanding.
Right.
And right. So is it maybe that sometimes I think definitely in the non-traditional cash gift world, I think sometimes, not to diminish the good work that people that write all that stuff do, but sometimes it freaks gift officers out. Like, whoa, okay, here's a thick book on donor advised funds. You know what?
Was it like a resource guide of like how to think, or was it just
it was
sites on it?
It was about trends. It was about research. I mean, not that and I'm not trying to, it's great. That's fine. But as somebody that just spends all day calling donors and talking to donors, it's like, all right, do I really need to know all this? I don't know. I'm putting it out there.
Yeah.
Just to be controversial maybe, but do I really need, as a gift officer, let's say I'm a major gift officer, do I really need to know all that?
No. Well, and so let me start at the top for anyone listening that doesn't know what a DAF is. Donor Advised Fund, the acronym is DAF, DAF, that most of the sector uses. So it is ultimately like a charitable account that you can open, a giving vehicle. So some families in the kind of the wealthier categories would open private foundations. That's a type of giving vehicle. A donor advised fund is similarly a giving vehicle. And so there are 501c3s across the country that sponsor donor advised funds. So an individual opens the account with a contribution. Many of the DAFs have zero minimum now, by the way. Open a donor advised fund with cash, a check, a complex asset, which we can get into. And then you can select from investment options to grow the funds tax-free. Of course, you get the tax deduction when you yourself make the contribution. It grows tax-free. And then the best part is you can give at any moment. You can give right away. You can give in 5 years and 10 years. And most do have required distribution amounts that they stipulate themselves. But they've been around since the 30s, actually.
Really? That I
Yes.
did not know.
Yes. So the community foundations were the first to establish donor advised funds. I believe the
Oh.
first was out of New York in the 1930s. And then in 1991, Mr. Johnson started Fidelity Charitable, which was kind of the first national DAF. Some people call them commercial DAFs or bank DAFs. But there are a few different categories now. So there is the community foundation DAF category. There's kind of this national DAF sponsor, which is like the Schwab and the NPTs. There's single issue DAFs, which are often religious organizations, or even some universities have their own DAFs. And then the last one is this growth of like tech solutions for DAF. So DAFI is one that's new, doing really well with the next gen. It's all a digital interface that works really well. So there's a lot there. I would say in terms of a gift officer, I think you do need to know a certain amount about the insights and the trends and the background. For example, the average DAF account is $117,000. So for me, $117,000. So for me, I'm thinking, okay, this is someone that's potentially a major donor, right? I would think most nonprofits define that, 6 figures as a major gift. So in my mind, I would start to categorize DAF gifts differently within my database, whatever you're using. Because to me, it's showing it's a more strategic donor. And I think statistically, DAF donors give more consistently throughout the year. There was just a report released by Chariot, which is kind of a DAF widget solution for nonprofits. And they had all kinds of interesting statistics on that DAF donors are ultimately more consistently generous. So I think there are some things to look at for nonprofits, gift officers who are thinking through what's our DAF strategy? Do we have one? Do we need one? And I think the answer is yes.
Agreed. I think we're giving people enough, gift officers enough right now on this CupoJoe to, right? Do you agree? I mean, open up your own. There's nothing like that. That'll give you a lot of experience, what we just talked about. And then of course, there's the beneficiary side that us staff holders either would pass once we put our assets in there, no longer ours technically, right? So heirs are not getting it. Our heirs can keep it going. Option number 1. Option number 2, hopefully we make charities beneficiaries of whatever's left in that donor advised fund when we pass, when our birth certificates expire, as I like to say. And now how about number 3? Correct me if my understanding is not accurate. If we do neither of those, they keep it? Like let's say I had one, let's say I was a single guy, had a donor advised, don't have any beneficiaries, I don't have kids, I pass. What happens to the money?
Yeah. So based on my experience, the DAF makes every effort to ensure that there are successors on accounts, whether it be charitable organizations or individuals. If no one is stipulated, or what I've seen played out in real life is a named individual. So a son, a niece, a nephew, a friend that just will not communicate with the donor advised fund sponsor after months, over a year. Not that this is a real life example. Those in theory, what I've seen in policies is yes, those are absorbed into, but not into any kind of fee category. With some of the national DAFs, it's put into a grant making pot, and there are individuals that then help grant out those funds. Within the community foundation world, I believe most of those are absorbed then into kind of a fund that will then benefit grantee partners in the community. So yes, although I will say in my experience, having worked at one, it was a really small number. Like of the individuals I worked with, like maybe there were 1 or 2 instances where like there wasn't one listed, or someone wouldn't get back to us over a very long period of time. In reality, I think a lot of the DAFs do really push for the successors, because it is an administrative nightmare too. If you think someone passes with a sizable DAF, what do you do with it? And you spend all that energy trying to find a solution. So I hope that answered your question.
It's great. And from my personal experience, and I have not mentioned the one that we have, so I won't trash any of them. It's great. They're great. From a beneficiary standpoint, when I go in and try to change a beneficiary or beneficiaries, sometimes I have to call them and say, where did you put that? I cannot find this anywhere. So I don't know. It's just, I don't know if
They're
that's
not perfect. I really like DAFs. I think they're great. They are not perfect. I think, and I think it's still a really ever-changing world, right? I think the statistic is over the past 5 years, donor advised funds have grown by like 85%. It's some really large number. I do think the average account size may go down over the coming years because now more and more companies are offering donor advised funds as like an employee benefit. So the average account size is likely to be a little bit smaller because of the numbers of those smaller accounts that I've seen an increase in.
I think this is another tool in our toolkit that's easy to talk about with donors. I want to be a resource to my donors, our donors. And I often say to donors, a lot of my work with donors is helping them be more strategic or creative in the way they're making their gifts. Now, the thought, even me, having been in planned giving space for 22 years, to talk to somebody in depth about a charitable lead trust, I'm breaking a sweat already.
Yeah.
Or a gift of closely held business, right? Not that that comes up much, but donor advised funds easy enough to understand that it's another tool. And I will often bring it up with donors. Well, you're really charitable. Do you have a donor advised fund? I'm not familiar with them. Oh, they're really easy. My wife and I have one. This is how we donate to this charity. And here are the benefits. So it's just, I think it's another easy way to provide a resource to our donors as opposed to, hi, I'm calling up for more money. Not that we say that, right? But that's often like I said, in the other episode with you, sometimes people will, when I cold call donors, oh, you're calling for money? Well, yeah, but only if you feel good about it. And
Right.
I work with, again, I help people who want to be more strategic in their giving. So I think it's an easy way. The other big point I think is helpful for people is, I'll just say the term and I'll let you flush it out. Flesh it out, not flesh it out. Sorry, flesh it out. The appreciated assets
Yes.
as they relate to donor advised funds. It's something that doesn't come up a lot, but it's pretty cool.
Right. So, in terms of stock appreciated securities, the donor advised fund is a great tool because ultimately a donor can think about eliminating capital gains. So if you buy a stock at a certain price and it goes up, over the years, you have tax implications. So when you contribute it to a donor advised fund, you're able to kind of eliminate some of those tax implications and then get a tax deduction yourself for making the contribution. It's up to 60% of your AGI for cash and up to 30% for securities. And the great thing about a donor advised fund too is all those kind of tax acknowledgements, they all kind of live within your portal, your hub. You can kind of look at your grant recommendations over the years. It's a nice, easy way as opposed to having all these different tax receipts you might have in a folder that you give your CPA at the end of the year. So a lot of donors just love the ease of that. And administratively in their life from both a tax perspective as well as just keeping track of who they're giving to. They're really good interfaces that help donors, regardless of your age, figure out where you're giving, what does that look like? And some of them have gotten more advanced and even kind of produce pie charts to you to show you what giving categories you're giving in. So I would say appreciated securities. And then you mentioned complex assets. A lot of the larger donor advised funds and even some of the smaller do talk with their kind of donors themselves, their DAF holders, about contributing complex assets. So whether it's real estate or interest in a private company, again, they can eliminate some tax implications, fund a donor advised fund, and then grant from that. So another area that I think, back to my clues and cues, as you've heard me say before, if you're a gift officer working with a donor, listen for things like that, right? In terms of, oh, we're thinking of selling the company or we have an IPO coming up. Those are opportunities to think through kind of strategy of how to engage and potentially grow the relationship in many ways.
And so the benefit of the donor advised fund, as you say, with real estate is we can donate the house to the DAF holder. Is that the right way to say it? What do you call them? DAF holders or?
Everyone says something different. DAF
No.
account holders, donors, primary account holders, it really depends which DAF.
So we can just donate the house to them and they can figure it out, right? I'm a donor. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm the donor. Just donate it to them. They'll figure it out. They'll sell it, whatever. Well, and the proceeds will go into our fund. You're the charity. You're the fundraiser. I'll make the grant to you once everything's settled. Is it that simple?
That's the simplest way to think about it. There's a lot in there in terms of if you do have if you are a nonprofit, you know, is there a business acceptance policy for what you're accepting? Who are the internal, key stakeholders or trustees that would need to be involved in this conversation? Is there an in-house counsel? Do you have an outside counsel? Do you use an intermediary? So I would say we could probably do a whole podcast on just complex assets. And I'm by no means a lawyer, but there's a lot there. But yes, in theory, it would be contributing it, getting evaluation on your contribution, having it kind of either go directly to the nonprofit, or in the case of donor advised funds, you could put it into the donor advised fund and then of course grant to that end recipient.
So yeah, the example I meant was we have but we have a vacation house in the mountains that I inherited from my parents. We really don't use it. And yeah, right. Something that's simple. It's just a house. It's not anything complex. It's just my wife and I, right? Pretty simple.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. But as a gift officer, again, I think, and I go, because I've lived this so many times, right away to say, okay, what state is it in? Do we need a realtor there? Right. As the nonprofit thinking through, or even the donor advised fund sponsor, there's a lot there. And I think some do take real estate and some do not, because it is, if you think about it, kind of a burdensome process to manage.
Yeah. Katie Collins, great stuff as always.
Always happy to join you for the, next topic, but thank you for having me today, Joe.
Thank you. And how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. My website's pathwayphilanthropic.com. And my email is katecollins@pathwayphilanthropic.com. So
Wonderful.
Always welcome outreach.
And how can I know there's a lot of ways you can help them, but when it comes to nonprofits, fundraisers, how can you help those folks?
Sure. I really gravitate towards, small to medium-sized organizations that are at critical points in their journey, and need some, new strategic initiatives, some recalibration on some of their collateral messaging to ensure that they're successful. In fundraising, it's an ever-changing world in terms of kind of generational traits, giving vehicles, and it's harder and harder, I think, to fundraise, right? And so I'm someone that can be a sounding board, a thought partner, and someone that can really come in to help organizations think through what do we need to do differently to succeed and further on our mission.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Joe.
All the best.